I was born in downtown Dallas at old St. Paul Hospital. That's where I got my name, Paul. My daddy moved here when I was 5 years old. Moved on a old country house out off Country Club Lane, but he was working over in Irving at a goat dairy, so Mama didn't like staying out in the country by herself, so we moved over on Crosby Road in 1943. Been here ever since. It was during the war, and Daddy was working at that at goat dairy, working 3 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon, $10 a day, 6 days a week. Made a lot of money. But I was 5 years old when we moved over there. My brother was 1, so we've been here ever since. My mother was raised here. My mother was a Gravely, and she wanted to move back home. And Daddy was from North Dallas, so he agreed to move up here in 1943. Yeah. First 8 or 9 years of my life, my daddy ran the goat dairy. And in 1950, my daddy decided to go back into barbering. He had barbered at the age of 17, 18, and had quit it and decided to go back into barbering. And he opened up his own shop and was a barber just off the old Carrollton Square for a number of years. The first 2 years Daddy barbered, he worked for Ben Stringfellow on the western side of the square in an old barber shop next to the old movie house, the old theater. And then in '52, he opened up his own barbershop, and it was called Red Price's Barbershop. And he was a barber there until about 1980 when he retired. Yeah, he knew a lot of men, a lot of people. Back in the early days when the barbers cut hair here in Carrollton, on Saturdays it was a pretty rough task because the farmers would come in from the farms. They'd bring their families in for shopping, and Daddy'd go get a haircut and a shave, and half of them looked like grizzly bears, you know. So, but haircutting was about 50 cents a haircut back then. Shave was a quarter, and they had a shoe shine man, so you get your shoes shined, and Mama would go off and buy, you know, the kids' toys or groceries or shoes or dresses for the girls. And so it was a pretty active spot, the barbershop. Well, you know, up until Carrollton invested in some industrial acreage, this was a farming community. And most of the people lived on farms. And they'd come into town on a weekend and do their shopping. So it was a farm community, very active downtown, very active. The grocery stores were down there, the hardware stores were there. What few service stations we had were there where you could get work done on your cars. You had the theater, you had the post office, you had the meat market, barbershop, bank. It was all right on the square. And that's where people would congregate on the weekends, yeah. Yeah, I've often told my dad he should have written a book and all the stories to solve the problems and all the jokes that were told. Barbershop humor, you know. Well, really, living out in the country, that was the only place to go. We would congregate on the square. When I was a young kid, if I was a good boy during the week, my mother would give me 25 cents allowance, and I'd get to walk downtown Carrollton and go to the theater. 25 cents, I could get in for a dime, nickel for popcorn, Cokes, candy, whatever. And then I'd go over and sweep up the barbershop and go home with Daddy. And as I grew older, the square became a congregation point for teenage boys. We'd take our cars down there and line them up, sit on the fenders, and tell jokes and make the cops mad. But the cops were very nice to us, but that was a place where we'd pretty much congregate, yeah. You know, for football, homecoming parades or things of that nature, it was always downtown. Any October event, fall festivals or anything like that was downtown. The theater was downtown. So yeah, that was a busy place. Very nice. Well, you know, as a younger boy, 10, 11, 12 years old, we used to swim a lot during the summer. We'd ride our bikes down the Trinity River, swim in the river, swim in the old gravel pits, the old Perry gravel pits. being that there wasn't much beyond Beltline North except woods we could hunt, I literally would walk from my home on Crosby Road with a gun in my hand to go hunting for doves or rabbits or whatever, and no problem. But we did a lot of hunting, and in high school, several of us had cars, and we formed an old car club called the Carrollton Rats. So we had a lot of fun souping up our old cars, so to speak. And we did a little quarter-mile racing on the weekend over at Grapevine. So, we had things to do. I had a 1940 model two-door sedan, a Ford. And the thing was hot, I guess, because I had dual pipes on it. I thought it was hot. I could lock it in second gear for quarter-mile racing. And we used to go down to the old Rexall drugstore, and you could buy about a half a pint of alcohol. And we'd put the alcohol in with the gas. And we thought in our mind that was really revving up the engine. But that's what we'd do for fun on Saturdays or Sunday afternoons. Well, growing up in Carrollton was very nice. As I look back upon it, you were able to get a circle of friends. I had friends at school who not only were friends at school, but friends at church or friends out in the afternoon. And so you had a real good close circle of friends, and you could visit. Everybody was friendly. You could go and play at their house or vice versa. The women would get together for canning or quilting bees, and the kids would play. It was pretty open and congenial, and really a nice place to grow up. Carrollton was really nice. It was just far enough away from Dallas that you could enjoy the bigger city if you wanted to, but it was still isolated enough as a small farming community that you get to know a lot of people and enjoy a lot of people. To ride the school bus, you had to be a 2-mile radius from school, and we fell within that 2-mile radius. So for 12 years, I basically walked to school until I got me a car. But we walked up Crosby Road. At that time, Crosby Road was a dirt road, and we could walk to school. If it was dry, we'd cut across the fields and walk across the fields to school. But that basically was the way we did it back in, School was good. I had, in the first grade, I had the same teacher my mother had, Miss Good. She'd been there, I guess, 100 years at that point, but she had all my aunts and uncles and my mother. So, but going through school was good. I went through the first 8 years of elementary school in the old red brick building that no longer stands, and was always looking forward to going next door to high school. Well, as it turned out, they built a new elementary, so I wound up going 12 years in the same basic buildings. But I enjoyed it, had good teachers, a lot of good friends. And, it gave me a good basis for going on to college, School was really, I thought, challenging. We had some easy teachers and some tough teachers. Chemistry was tough, physics was tough, algebra was tough. But I always enjoyed the history of the English and some math. But one of the things I remember about high school, as a senior, we had a volunteer fire department here in Carrollton, and they allowed me to volunteer on the fire department. So as a volunteer fireman, when the alarm went off, my teachers were always willing to let me go chase fires, and I always thought that's pretty neat. But I had a lot of friends in high school. Played sports, ran track. When I was a senior in high school, I happened to be the only guy on the track team at that time. But to practice, the coach asked us to run from the school to the old railroad tracks in Addison. It's 4 miles up, 4 miles back. So I'd run my 8 miles and go home and clean up and go to work at the old A&P store downtown Carrollton. But school was really neat. I enjoyed it. I had a lot of good friends. Still have them today. Yeah, when I was about 15, I started working for Mr. Wigan, who ran the A&P store, and I was a stock boy at that time, and later worked my way up to cashier. But I guess I worked there 3 or 4 years, and it gave me an opportunity to make some money, which I needed. But I asked my daddy one day, could I buy a car? And he immediately said yes. And then he added, but you need to buy your own insurance, your gas, your tires. And I said, whoa, that means I got to go to work. He said, that's right. So I went to work for the A&P store, basically, to finance my old car, that old 40 Ford I was telling you about. But I got to know a lot of people in the store, and Mr. Wigan would sit us down and tell us how to treat customers and the mannerisms and how to be polite. And I always valued that because it spilled over into my later years when I went to work as a salesman for 40 years, worked for International Trucks in the sales management end of the business. So it was a good foundation, a good place to start. But I enjoyed it. Well, you know, on Saturdays, like I was saying, the farmers would bring their trucks or whatever in and park it up there on the A&P lot. And then they would all, you know, go out into the community there and do what they needed to do. And a lot of evenings, the A&P would bring in a couple flatbed trailers, throw some straw up on these flatbed trailers, and they'd have a fiddling contest or square dancing. So the farmer, he could come to town, do his thing, go to the square dance, and then go home. Didn't have TV to watch. You know, they had a few radios. So it was A&P store was pretty centralized place to meet and buy you groceries and whatever. Yeah. I remember one time, I mentioned being a volunteer fireman. I remember one day the alarm went off. It was in the evening. I was not in school. We went to Addison and fought the fire at the old Addison train depot. And there was no running water available, so we did it with bucket brigades. I'll never forget that. Climbed up on the roof and passed the buckets along. Another time with the fire department, it was in the middle of the day, and it wound up being a drowning out at the old dam, out at Carrollton Trent River Dam. And I got in a boat with a guy, and we were doing grappling, trying to locate the drowning victim. And I looked up, and my daddy was standing up on the bridge, and I caught hold of you-know-what for that and was told to get out. But there was a lot of memories. And when I was 10 years old, we were on a Boy Scout outing down at the Trent River, and I fell and broke my arm. And the thing I remember about that is that Saturday night I was going to get to go see the show King Kong. And I did not get to go because I had to suffer with a broken arm. But I later got to see King Kong. But, you know, just living in a small community and having so many friends and relatives, it was pretty neat. I enjoyed it. Well, I had two things going against me. I had my daddy as the barber, and I had my mother as a dental assistant, dental receptionist. So I couldn't do anything that they didn't hear about before I got home. But since my daddy was the town barber, that was helpful to me because he knew I got to know a lot of guys, and I could get jobs on the weekends that I wouldn't even know about. He'd come home and say, okay, I got you a job this Saturday. Some of those jobs weren't too good. I remember one day he said, I got you a job this Saturday down here by the old grain mill, the old feed mill. So I went down there right after daybreak, and what it was, they'd unloaded a whole pile of old lumber, and they wanted to take the nails out. So my job for all day was to take nails out of these old boards. Many a day I've gone down there and unloaded boxcars where they were bringing lumber and sheetrock into the old lumber company, and even helped load cars with feed bags out of the old feed mill, the Blanton, the feed mill. But there was always something to do around town. Getting caught in the Trent River one day, swimming in my bare skin with my mother was one event I'll never forget. People that knew my mother knew she was pretty stern, and she made me get out of that water real quick, I can tell you that. But being that my daddy was a barber, my mother, you know, worked for the dental place there, it allowed us to know a lot of people and be involved in a lot of different things. Mother and daddy were both active in the church, so we had a lot of friends that way, you know. Well, the window is a stained glass window that came out of the old Union Baptist Church that originally was located up on Old Perry Cemetery off Perry Road, which, by the way, was the first Baptist church organized in Dallas County, down at Farmers Branch, and subsequently moved out to Carrollton. But A.W. Perry was one of the founding members of that church, and later they had this stained glass window put in, one of the windows, to honor his involvement in that church. And it stood in that window for many, many years. We went to that church when we first moved to Carrollton. And so I was very familiar with the church, but had no idea they were tearing it down until one day they were, and Miss Peggy Perry Oliver saved that window from being razzed. She literally confronted the man doing the razzing and challenged him to save that stained glass as well as the other one, which they did. And it stayed in her garage for years and years until it was finally discovered and restored. Now it hangs here in this genealogy section. But A.W. Perry came to this area in 1844. His brother, one of his brothers, Middleton Perry, had come to this area in 1837, right after the Alamo, and found that the soil was to his liking. It was good black dirt. He took a bottle of it home, showed his brothers, which was A.W. and some of the other guys, and then in 1844 they came back and settled here under a Peters Colony grant under the state of Texas. And he first stayed up here, had land up here off Trinity Mills, which is like 35 and Trinity Mills is today. And then later bought 800 acres over here on Perry Road and made that his home place. He lived there in a little old, what they call a dog trot home. It was open down the middle, two rooms on each side. They had 14 children in that little bitty home. And then later on, after he passed away, one of his sons, DeWitt Perry, built his home, which today is Perry Museum over on Perry Road. But the little house, A.W. had 14 kids. The big house, DeWitt had one child. That one child was Pearl Perry. And this Pearl Perry married Mr. Gravely. That's my grandmother. And then my mother was one of 10 children from her. So I have a connection directly back to A.W. Perry in this area. Well, Jimmy Porter, when I first met Jimmy, of course I was in high school, but Jimmy was the town's favorite guy. He was Mr. Baseball. He was a hard-working guy. He worked down at the feed mill or most anywhere, the lumber yard, most anywhere they needed him. He was no bachelor, but he would walk the streets with a baseball bat and glove and a ball looking for kids to play baseball. And subsequently, all the boys in town knew him and loved him. A lot of times you'd see Jimmy walking down the street with 3 or 4 kids following him, trying to get enough to play baseball. But when I was first married in 1960, Jimmy lived in the pasture right behind our house. He lived in an old converted train car that they'd converted like an RV type unit that he lived in. And so my family, we were good friends with Jimmy. My boys grew up knowing him, and every kid in town loved him. But Jimmy, they've named a park after him now, Jimmy Porter Park, and which I think is a great honor to Jimmy. But Jimmy was just a great guy to all the kids around town, just a super guy. My daddy used to cut people's hair and shave them that were disabled and couldn't get out of their homes. I know many a time at the time of death, in preparing people for the funeral, they'd call my daddy in to do haircuts or shaves for that, which they don't do today, but many times they would do that then. But Marjorie's daddy, Mr. Schaefer, and my daddy were best of friends. They were big fishing buddies, fished many a night. It wasn't anything for my daddy to work 7 days a week and then fish all Saturday night with Mr. Schaefer and then go to church on Sunday morning. That's pretty common. But we used to go down on the Trinity River banks and fish many a Friday night, Saturday night. But well, A.W. Perry when he moved here in 1844, started acquiring land. He was a pretty smart businessman and acquired a lot of land. And in 1853, he bought that 880 acres or so off J.B. Lee over here on Perry Road. And that land ran from Ryan Street up North Carrollton to Crosby on the south, down to what we know today as the city of Carrollton. And in the late 1800s, like 1878, A.W. Perry laid out or platted downtown Carrollton with stores, that businesses and homes, and started selling land for the city of Carrollton. And the railroad at that time, the MK&T had been approved to come through Carrollton. So all of a sudden, Carrollton was a historical place at that point for lumber and all kinds of farm products and things of that nature. And the railroads were very important. And A.W. built his home just up on the bluff in 1856. The house is no longer there, but he lived there in 1856. But he has been given the title of Mr. Carrollton because of the fact that he plotted the first land, settled the first area, and subsequently the town has grown from that point. But him, allowing the railroad, giving land for the railroad, for the depot and things like that, created a lot of growth in Carrollton. And then he had 14 children, 10 of which grew to be adults. And so they had farms and whatever around here. And they were instrumental in the area. One of A.W.'s brothers, Middleton Perry, went on down to Lancaster and settled basically in that area down there, settled the town of Lancaster. And one of the little off stories to Middleton Perry, or to the Perry family, when they came from Greene County, Illinois in 1844, Mr. Middleton Perry, A.W.'s brother, brought with him a horse called Steel Dust. This was a quarter horse. And they raced that horse all over North Texas. And A.W. was not only a farmer, but A.W. raised fine horses and mules. And he and Middleton raced that horse Steel Dust. And if you read a lot of the stories in the magazines about history of horses, you'll find Steel Dust has been given the name of the father of the quarter horse. But when the Civil War broke out, you had to provide your own horse and saddle and guns. And many of the men that joined the cavalry wanted the offshoots of Steel Dust as their horse for the Civil War. That's all been documented. So, there was a lot of history involved with the Perrys, not only in Carrollton, but in Lancaster as well. And then the Graveleys, Mr. Perry's daughter, Pearl Perry, married Arthur Gravely, and he was a large farmer. And his daddy was a large farmer. They owned a large farm down where LBJ and Marsh Lane is today. And so the Graveleys had a lot of land around Carrollton. So there was a lot of history involved in both sides of the family. Mr. DeWitt Perry, this is A.W.'s son, married a lady named Frances Grimes. Now, Grimes just came from Tennessee, and her daddy was a captain in the Civil War for Tennessee Cavalry. And that was a large family, and he's buried out here at Furneaux Cemetery, he and his family today. So the family mix was intertwined and pretty large. Yeah, I was born in Dallas in '37, and we moved up here in '42, out in the country, and then into the so-called city area in 1943, which was country then. When I look back on Carrollton, when I went to college in 1956, Baylor University had 4,000 students. The population of Carrollton was 4,000. So I thought Baylor was a big university. And today I look at Carrollton, and it's 130,000, 140,000 people. Not only is it 130,000 people, it's a very mixed citizenry. So it's still a very exciting place. I'm very proud of Carrollton. I think we have good schools and good city management, and it's just still a great place to live and to work. I was here during two floods, one in the 40s and one in 1952, I think maybe, was a pretty good flood.
Were you in the volunteer fire department then?
Not that early. But I know the flood got up to about 3 or 4 feet in downtown. They had a big train wreck just south of Carrollton, and on one of the trains was watermelons. And I remember my daddy said, "Let's go." So we drove down and loaded the car up with watermelons. But every time it'd come a good rain, it was prior to having the upriver dam structure. The old Trinity River would get out of its banks, and Carrollton was built down in the low land. The Price side of my line goes back pretty far with the old Trinity River. My granddaddy Price helped build the dam down there in 1912, which stands today, and he worked the floodgates of the old river. But that didn't hold back the floodwaters. But they built the levees, and so everything's under control now. But it used to be quite bad. Back when he first opened up, it was next to what they call the ice house. It's where people could come by, block ice, you know. I told my wife the other day, we were talking about it, it was kind of like a very early version of a 7-Eleven. It was open in the front, and you could literally just pull your car right up, and the guy would say, you know, "What do you need?" Or they could serve you right there out of your car. And then as far as the ice itself, you know, they'd make delivery to houses around that needed ice. I guess back to your question about one of the exciting things about growing up in Carrollton, I had an uncle, my mother's youngest brother, Milburn Gravely, who served 6 terms as mayor while I was growing up in Carrollton. So that always made it really exciting to me to know that my uncle was mayor. He married a lady named McKinnish, and her daddy and uncles were also mayors. So both sides of my families have been involved politically in Carrollton. So I guess one thing I missed is that real small town effect. Carrollton has just gotten big, traffic and roads everywhere and buildings everywhere. You know, growing up in a small town was nice, and I miss the small town effect. All the closeness of the people. You got to know people, and you took care of each other and watched out after each other. You'd see them on Sunday, you'd see them at school, things of that nature. But today, I mean, you could go all day and not see anybody you know. You know, it's just a different diversity of populace is what it is. Different times. I miss the smaller times. T.C. Rice was in charge of the Parks Department here in Carrollton. And while he was managing that particular area, we had the greatest parks in the state of Texas. They were beautiful, and still are. But a lot of the current parks we have today, you can attribute that to T.C. Rice. I know T.C., still see him today, go to church with him. So yeah, T.C. was a big contributor to the city of Carrollton and its parks.